Welcome back. I want to do a continuation of my last video in a way, because I'd mentioned that I was having some problems with this guy. And I thought I'd talk about one of them because I thought in many ways it's a great example of things that can happen. I made a mistake. At least I think I did. Well, I'll explain as I go here. You see, we're out in the round pen here because basically this is where we had the problem. And turns out the round pen may actually be the source of our problem. What happened was, well, every horse, I don't use this a lot, but, when the weather permits, because some days it's really hot, some days it's cold, sometimes it's windy, sometimes it's raining. We don't get a lot of good days, so I don't even want to use it a whole lot. And I really don't have the need of a round pen real bad, but a few times we do like to use it. So I have been out here a couple of times with a few different horses, and I have noticed something that is fairly consistent, is that in this round pen, for some reason, I'm not getting very good circles. Now, some people get really obsessed about that kind of stuff, and the horse has to do absolutely perfect circles. I'm not overly concerned about that stuff most of the time, but I'm starting to notice some pattern. Pretty much every horse I've ever had in here, well, they didn't do really good circles, and they were fairly consistent. They tended to stay towards that fence where the camera is. They stayed in from the opposite fence. That end that you can't see, there's actually a big auger sitting there. They tend to stay away from that too, not so much that side. I always assumed, because of what I know in my experiences, that it had to do with, well, most of the horses are out that way, so it is actually a fairly natural thing for them to be drawn that direction, which would get them towards that side and away from that side. So I just assumed that was what was happening. But it seemed to be, they were all doing it, and the circles did improve a little bit. We never really got those real nice circles where the horse stays consistently just a couple feet out from the wall all the way around. Now, over on that side, we got, like I said, there's a big auger sticking up over there, and I figured, well, yeah, that's kind of weird looking thing. The horses might want to shy away from that a bit. Well, it wasn't until I started riding this guy that I think I figured out what was actually happening, because when you're on the horse, you can feel the footfalls. I can kind of feel what the ground is like underneath from the seat. So I noticed that, well, he was, even before, his circles weren't real good. Riding him, they weren't much better, if any. But I started noticing something, that he was doing basically the exact same thing, but I started noticing something. This round pen is not as consistent as some. He really wants to treat bad, and he's getting annoying, and he's going to get a poke in the nose for it pretty quick. But this round pen is not as consistent in its surface as some. The outer areas tend to be churned up a little more, like, from the horses running around. The center area is a little more solid. It's a little more packed down, a little smoother. And I started noticing what was actually happening was, because of the soft and hard areas in the round pen, the horse was actually preferring to stick to this more solid ground, which is not unusual. Horses will actually pick their footing. I mean, they've been walking since the day they were born. They know how to do this stuff. So they will actually, by choice, choose where they're going to walk. And this was something that I actually started to notice with him, is that the places he was choosing to walk were actually the firmer ground. Any place that the horses typically would stay in from, those are the places that were the softest. So our whole problem was actually footing. It wasn't what I perceived. Might have been, because like I said, my experience and knowledge says horses are attracted to certain things, they shy away from certain things, and this would be causing certain behaviors in the round pen. But as it turns out, I may have actually been wrong, because I started noticing, like I said, when I was riding him, he was definitely preferring the firmer footing. The spots that were definitely a lot softer, like that side over there where the big scary auger is. At least I thought the auger was scary. Turns out it wasn't that. It's that area over there happens to be the softest area. And, well, even over on the far side there, it's pretty soft. If you come in a little bit, it gets firmer. And that's exactly what the horses were all doing, is they were just picking the firmer ground, which I didn't realize until I was riding, because then I could really feel through the saddle. I could feel his footfalls. I could feel the ground underneath and the concussion. And I could tell how hard or soft the ground was when I was riding. And that was when I started cluing into the fact that it wasn't any of the typical things that you would normally associate with horse behavior. It was actually the round pen itself, and just by nature of this one. And I don't know that we can do much about it. If it was a little more consistent throughout, well, chances are we'd have less problem, but it's not. So I think the problem is probably going to always exist. Now, like I said, I think I had one problem figured out. That was the one I was talking about. I hadn't figured out how to address it. Well, in fact, due to the fact that it's just the horse choosing better footing, I'm not sure if I even should address it. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to run into. You're going to perhaps occasionally misdiagnose something and later on finally figure out what the real problem is. Then you're stuck with the dilemma is, well, either what do you do about it, or do you do anything at all? In this particular case, it's a tough one, because I do want the horse to go where I want it to go, but at the same time, I'm pretty lenient when it comes to allowing the horse to choose its footing, and sometimes that's the smart thing to do. And from experience, one of my other horses, when I was riding her, when I first started riding her, I'd ride her on a loose rein and let her pick her footing, as long as she was going the general direction that I wanted. I didn't worry too much, and there was one day in particular I was riding down a dirt road, and it had some muddy spots, and we decided, we kind of wanted to go down the road, and she didn't want to, and finally I just said, okay, let's just see where she wants to go. Well, as it turned out, all she wanted to do was just go a couple feet off the road. She ran perfectly parallel to the road, still went where I wanted her to go, but she was on firmer ground. I looked down and I realized the difference is, instead of all the slippery, sloppy mud that she was sliding around in, she was walking on this grassy area that, although it was wet and a little squishy, it was much, much firmer, and she had much better traction on it. Was she being difficult by not going where I wanted her to go? No, not really. She was actually being smart and picking the better footing. And on that same note, I'll share another little story that not mine, happened to somebody else. They shared with me. They were on their horse. They had to go and round up some other horses, and they crossed an area that was typically muddy, and they'd crossed quite a few times without incident. And when they got up to the edge of this mud, the horse didn't want to go. It balked. Well, they insisted that the horse went. And unfortunately, it took a couple steps into this mud and sunk up to its knees. The horse was smart. It knew where the good footing and the bad footing was. It knew where it should and shouldn't go. That particular area, I'm familiar with it myself. And there actually is, even though it looks the same all the way across, there are actually some firmer and softer spots in it. And sometimes the horse just knows best. So sometimes we're better off just actually letting the horse do what the horse does. And, anyhow, I thought I'd share that one with you. We aren't always right. Sometimes the horse knows better. Have a good day.